There are stores that defined Canadian shopping for decades before disappearing completely. If you're under 30, you've never heard of them. If you're over 40, you remember exactly what they smelled like, where your local store was, and what you bought there. These aren't just businesses that closed. They're cultural touchstones that shaped Canadian life before American chains took over. If you remember shopping at these 10 stores, you're witnessing Canadian retail history that the next generation will never experience. Here's what we lost and why it mattered. 1. Eaton's wasn't just where Canadians shopped. It was where they got their first job, bought their first suit, and ordered from the Christmas catalog every year. The company existed for 130 years before collapsing in 1999, and its death marked the end of an era. Here's what made Eaton's different. They invented mail-order shopping in Canada. The Eaton's catalog was 600 pages of everything a Canadian family needed. Rural families in Saskatchewan ordered their entire wardrobes through that catalog. It arrived twice a year, and people treated it like a major event. Kids circled what they wanted for Christmas. Adults planned their spring purchases. But here's what killed it. Eaton's refused to adapt to changing retail. They kept their downtown flagship stores while suburban malls pulled customers away. They maintained expensive real estate in dying downtown cores. They missed the shift to big-box retail and warehouse stores. By the 1990s, Eaton's was hemorrhaging money trying to maintain a business model from 1950. The collapse was brutal. They filed for bankruptcy protection in 1997, restructured, failed again. Final liquidation sales started in August 1999. Canadians lined up for hours to buy pieces of a dying institution, display cases, mannequins, the wooden escalators from the Montreal store. People were buying memories, not merchandise. But here's what nobody talks about. Eaton's death wasn't just a business failure. It was American retail winning. Walmart had entered Canada in 1994. The Canadian department store model couldn't compete with American efficiency and lower prices. Eaton's died so Walmart could expand. If you remember the Eaton's Santa Claus parade, the catalog arriving in October, or the ninth floor restaurant in Toronto, you remember peak Canadian retail before globalization erased it. Byway was the discount store for working-class Canadians from the 1960s through the 1990s. The logo was a blue and yellow smiley face. The slogan was honest value, always. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't aspirational. It was where you went when you needed stuff cheap. Here's what Byway sold. Everything. Clothing, housewares, toys, electronics, hardware. It was organized chaos, fluorescent lighting, metal shelving, no frills. But prices were 30 to 40% below department stores. For families on tight budgets, Byway was essential. The stores had a specific aesthetic, concrete floors, industrial shelving, everything stacked high. The clothing section smelled like new plastic and cardboard. The toy section was mayhem during Christmas. Nothing was displayed beautifully. It was functional retail for people who cared about price, not presentation. But here's what happened. Walmart entered Canada in 1994 by buying 122 Woolco stores. Walmart had better supply chains, lower prices, and cleaner stores. Byway couldn't compete. They filed for bankruptcy in 1997, closed briefly, reopened under new ownership, then died permanently in 2001. The death wasn't dramatic. Byway just slowly became irrelevant. Each store closed quietly. The buildings were repurposed. Within 5 years, an entire generation of Canadians forgot Byway existed. The discount store that served millions disappeared because an American company did discount better. If you remember Byway's blue and yellow smiley face or bought school clothes there in the 80s, you remember working-class Canadian retail before Walmart monopolized it. Consumers distributing was a bizarre retail concept. You walked into a showroom with display items behind glass. You picked what you wanted from a catalog. You filled out a form, You waited while they retrieved your item from a warehouse in the back. It was like shopping in a museum where you had to ask permission to buy things. Here's why this model existed. Lower overhead. No shoplifting. Minimal floor space. The warehouse model meant they could offer prices 20 to 30% below traditional retail. The inconvenience was the trade-off for savings. But here's what shopping there was actually like. You'd find the item you wanted in the catalog, write down the item number, fill out a paper form with a tiny golf pencil, hand it to someone behind a counter, wait 15 minutes while they went to the warehouse. Hope the item was in stock. If it wasn't, you'd do the whole process again with a different item. The catalog was the key to everything. It was organized by item number. Kitchen appliances in the 3000s, electronics in the 5000s, jewelry in the 8000s. Canadians knew these number ranges like area codes. You didn't say, "I need a toaster." You said, "I'm looking for something in the 3200s. The death came suddenly. Competition from big box stores, Price Club and Costco offered similar savings without the ridiculous wait times. Why fill out forms and wait when you could grab items yourself at Costco? Consumers Distributing filed for bankruptcy in 1996. Every store closed within months. But here's the nostalgia element. That tiny golf pencil and the item forms are burned into Canadian memory. The frustration of writing down item 4728 only to be told it was out of stock. The warehouse smell of cardboard and plastic. The weird pleasure of watching your item come down the conveyor belt. If you ever filled out one of those forms with a tiny pencil, you experienced Canadian retail inefficiency that somehow worked for 30 years. 4. Miracle Food Mart. Miracle Food Mart wasn't just a grocery store. It was a warehouse grocery experience that made you feel like you were shopping during a supply shortage. Industrial shelving, concrete floors, products in their shipping boxes. No frills was an understatement. Here's the business model. Strip out all the expensive parts of grocery retail. No fancy displays. No background music. Minimal staff. Products stayed in cardboard boxes on industrial shelves. You loaded your own groceries. You bagged your own groceries. The savings were passed to customers through prices 15 to 20% below traditional supermarkets. The stores felt post-apocalyptic. Fluorescent lighting casting shadows, rows of identical boxes stacked floor to ceiling. The smell of cardboard and industrial refrigeration. Shopping carts with wonky wheels. It was utilitarian retail that made Walmart look luxurious. But here's what middle-class Canadians did. They complained about the aesthetic while shopping there every week. Miracle Food Mart wasn't aspirational. Nobody wanted to be seen shopping there. But when you could save $40 on a $200 grocery bill, aesthetics didn't matter. The chain was sold and rebranded multiple times. Started as Miracle Mart department stores in the 1960s, became Miracle Food Mart grocery stores in the 1970s. Changed ownership repeatedly through the 1980s and 1990s. Finally disappeared as an independent brand in the 2000s when acquired by Metro. But here's the legacy. Miracle Food Mart pioneered the no-frills grocery model that No Frills, Food Basics, and Fresh Co. still use. The aesthetic of industrial efficiency in grocery retail started here. The idea that you don't need mood lighting and wood fixtures to sell groceries came from stores like Miracle Food Mart. If you remember shopping at Miracle Food Mart and feeling like you were in a warehouse apocalypse while saving money, you experienced Canadian discount grocery culture at its peak. The Hudson's Bay Company is Canada's oldest corporation, founded in 1670. But the Bay as a department store was peak Canadian retail from the 1970s through the 1990s. Before it became a struggling chain trying to stay relevant, the Bay was where middle-class Canadians bought everything important. Here's what the Bay represented. Nicer than Sears, but more accessible than Eaton's. The middle ground of Canadian retail. You bought your Christmas decorations at the Bay, your towels, your kitchen appliances. Canadian and everywhere. The stores had a specific character. multi-floor layouts with escalators. The Bay credit card that everyone had, the distinctive green and white shopping bags. The cosmetics counters on the first floor that smelled like all the perfume samples mixed together. The furniture section on the top floor that nobody ever went to. But here's what happened. The Bay made every wrong decision possible in the 2000s. They tried to compete with Walmart on price. Failed. They tried to go up market and compete with Nordstrom. Failed. They closed profitable stores and kept unprofitable ones. They changed their strategy every 3 years. By 2020, the Bay was a zombie company surviving on real estate value, not retail sales. The COVID pandemic almost killed them. Stores closed for months. Online shopping became permanent. When stores reopened, foot traffic never recovered. In 2024, the Bay is still technically operating, but it's a shell of what it was. Half the stores closed. The ones remaining feel empty. But here's the nostalgia. If you're a Canadian over 40, you have Bay memories. The Christmas window displays. The toy section before Christmas. The restaurant inside some stores where your grandmother took you for lunch. If you remember when the Bay was the default choice for everything from bedding to coats, you remember Canadian retail before it became dominated by American chains and online shopping. 6. Woodward's was BC and Alberta's version of Eaton's, a department store chain that started in Vancouver in 1892 and became synonymous with Western Canadian retail. If you lived west of Manitoba, Woodward's was where you shopped for everything. Here's what made Woodward's iconic. The $1.49 day sales that happened every month. People lined up before stores opened. The promotions were legendary. The giant W sign on top of the Vancouver store that was a city landmark. The food floor that sold groceries alongside department store items. The stores were massive. 6 floors in the downtown Vancouver location. Entire floors dedicated to furniture, appliances, clothing, or toys. The bargain basement where everything was discounted. The restaurant on the top floor, it was a shopping destination, not just a store. But here's what killed Woodward's: real estate. The company was worth more dead than alive. The downtown Vancouver building sat on land worth hundreds of millions. The Bay bought Woodward's in 1993, converted some stores to Bay locations, and closed the rest. The real estate was sold for development. The death was controversial. The Vancouver flagship store closed in 1993 and sat abandoned for years. Homeless people occupied it in 2002 in a protest that lasted months. The building was finally demolished and replaced with condos. The giant W sign was preserved as a heritage artifact. But here's what Western Canadians lost. Woodward's was theirs. It was BC founded, Western-focused, and understood the market. The Bay was Toronto-based and never replicated what Woodward's did. When Woodward's died, Western Canada lost retail identity to central Canadian corporate control. If you remember shopping at Woodward's or seeing that giant W sign, you remember when Western Canada had retail institutions that weren't controlled by Toronto or America. 7. Bargain Harold's Bargain. Harold's started as a discount liquidator in Toronto in 1980. The concept was simple. Buy overstock, returns, and discontinued items. Sell them cheap in stores that looked like organized crime scenes. It was discount retail taken to absurd extremes. Here's what shopping there was like. Products piled in cardboard boxes. No organization system. Toys mixed with kitchen appliances, mixed with clothing, mixed with electronics. You didn't shop at Bargain Harold's. You excavated. The thrill was finding something valuable in the chaos. The stores smelled like cardboard, dust, and possibility. The floors were concrete. Products weren't priced individually. Everything in a section cost the same. All toys, $5. All kitchen items, $10. You grabbed items and hoped they worked because returns weren't really a thing. But here's what made it brilliant. Bargain Harold's understood that some people enjoy hunting for deals. The chaos was the point. If everything was organized and clearly priced, it wouldn't be an adventure. The disorganization created excitement. You might find a $100 item for $10 if you dug deep enough. The chain expanded through the 1990s but died in the 2000s. Dollar stores offered similar prices with better organization. Winners and HomeSense offered treasure hunt shopping with nicer environments. The extreme discount liquidator model became obsolete, but here's the legacy. Every Canadian who shopped at Bargain Harold's has a story. Finding a toy they wanted for their kid at 90% off. Digging through a box of electronics and finding something valuable. The satisfaction of telling friends you got an insane deal. If you remember Bargain Harold's and the chaos of discount treasure hunting, you remember peak Canadian bargain shopping before it became corporatized. Radio Shack in Canada was different from the American version. It was owned by Intertan, a Canadian company, and operated independently. For decades, it was where Canadians bought electronics, computers, and random tech accessories. Here's what Radio Shack was for Canadians. The place you bought cables, adapters, batteries, random electronic components. The staff knew about technology. They could answer questions. They could build custom cables. It was technical retail for people who actually needed technical help. The stores had a specific smell, new electronics, solder, and plastic packaging. The wall of batteries. The computer section with demos running. The weird gadgets near the register that nobody bought. The catalogs stacked by the door with every component known to humanity. But here's what killed it. The internet. Why drive to Radio Shack for a cable when you could order it from Amazon for half the price? The specialty knowledge that made Radio Shack valuable became available online. Forums, YouTube tutorials, and product reviews replaced helpful staff. The end came in waves. Intertan sold the Canadian stores to Circuit City in 2004. Circuit City went bankrupt in 2009. The Radio Shack brand bounced between owners. Stores closed gradually. By 2017, Radio Shack was gone from Canada. But here's what Canadians lost. A place to buy obscure electronic components immediately. If you needed a specific adapter at 7 p.m. on a Saturday, Radio Shack had it. Now you wait 3 days for Amazon shipping. The convenience of immediate access to technical products died with Radio Shack. If you remember buying cables and batteries at Radio Shack and talking to staff who actually understood electronics, you remember when technical retail meant something in Canada. Sam the Record Man. Sam the Record Man wasn't just a music store. It was Canadian music culture in physical form. The flagship Toronto store with the spinning neon discs was a landmark. The stores sold vinyl, cassettes, CDs, and concert tickets. If you were into music in Canada, you went to Sam's. Here's what made Sam's special. The staff were music fanatics. They knew every album, every artist, every obscure B-side. You could ask for recommendations and get genuine expertise. The stores hosted in-store performances. They sold imports you couldn't find anywhere else. The flagship Toronto store on Yonge Street was iconic. The spinning neon record signs visible from blocks away. Musicians visited it. It was Toronto's music identity in retail form. But here's what killed it. Digital music. Napster arrived in 1999. iTunes launched in 2003. By 2005, physical music sales were collapsing. Sam's tried to adapt by selling DVDs and video games. It wasn't enough. The chain went bankrupt in 2007. The Toronto flagship closed in 2007. The spinning discs were preserved as heritage artifacts. The death wasn't just business failure. It was culture shifting. Music went from physical product you bought in stores to digital files you downloaded. The entire concept of a record store became obsolete. Sam's died because the format it sold became irrelevant. But here's what disappeared with it. Music discovery through browsing. Talking to knowledgeable staff about what to listen to. Taking it home and reading liner notes while listening. But something was lost. If you remember Sam the Record Man, the spinning neon signs and buying CDs there, You remember when music was physical and discovering it meant going to a store? Tien. Future Shop. Future Shop was Canada's answer to American big box electronics. It started in Vancouver in 1982 and became the place Canadians bought computers, TVs, and electronics. The stores were huge, blue, and everywhere. For 20 years, Future Shop dominated Canadian electronics retail. Here's what made Future Shop successful. Aggressive sales tactics, commission-based staff who actually knew products, competitive pricing, extended warranties that actually made money. They understood Canadian market better than American competitors. The stores had energy, loud music, bright lighting, TVs everywhere playing demos, computer stations where you could try software, the cell phone section with every carrier, video game sections with playable demos. It was sensory overload, designed to excite you into buying. But here's the twist. Best Buy bought Future Shop in 2001 but kept both brands operating. For 15 years, Canada had both Future Shop and Best Buy stores. Often in the same malls, they were the same company pretending to compete with themselves. The death came suddenly. In 2015, Best Buy announced they were closing all 131 Future Shop stores. Immediately, 66 locations became Best Buys overnight. The rest closed permanently. Canadians showed up to shop at Future Shop and found Best Buy instead. But here's why. This hurt her. Future Shop was Canadian, built in Vancouver, grew organically across Canada, understood Canadian market. When Best Buy killed it, they eliminated a Canadian brand to consolidate under their American brand. It was corporate efficiency erasing Canadian retail identity. If you remember Future Shop's blue stores, aggressive salespeople, and that feeling of electronics retail excitement, you remember when Canada had its own tech retail giant before Best Buy absorbed it. These stores weren't just businesses, they were cultural institutions that defined Canadian life. Eaton's catalog was how rural Canada connected to consumer culture. Consumers distributing tiny pencils are embedded in collective memory. Sam's spinning neon signs were Toronto landmarks. Future Shop was homegrown success before American acquisition. Most died because American chains had better efficiency, lower prices, and more capital. Walmart killed Byway and Miracle Food Mart. Best Buy absorbed Future Shop. Online shopping killed Sam's and Radio Shack. The stores that survived, like the Bay, became shells of themselves. Canadian retail wasn't killed by failure. It was killed by competition from larger, more efficient American operations and by technological change that made physical retail obsolete. The stores that defined Canadian shopping for generations couldn't compete with American scale and internet convenience. If you remember even half of these stores, you witnessed Canadian retail culture that's now completely gone. The next generation will never know what it was like to shop at consumers distributing with a tiny pencil, dig through chaos at Bargain Heralds, or see Sam's spinning neon discs on Yonge Street. These stores are dead. But for Canadians who shopped at them, they're not forgotten. They're proof that Canadian retail once had its own identity before American chains and online shopping made everything the same everywhere.